Hey everyone, welcome back, and thanks for tuning in. Today we've got an update on the big beautiful bill. And I'll be honest with you, it's not perfect. It's not what we hoped for, not what we fought for, but it's something. And in this political climate, that might be the best shot we've got. The Senate is making what looks like its final push to gut the NFA tax. And while there's reason to be skeptical, there's also reason to pay attention. I'm going to break it all down for you. What's in the bill, what's not, and what it means. For those who haven't been following every twist and turn, this bill, unofficially dubbed the Big Beautiful Bill, has been positioned as a rare opportunity to chip away at the decades-old burden imposed by the National Firearms Act. Just days ago, hopes were high until word came down that the crucial language targeting the NFA was quietly stripped out during a round of backroom edits and procedural hurdles. It was a gut punch. But then, just past midnight, a new version of the bill surfaced, revised, compromised, but still carrying a thread of possibility. It's being called our second shot, maybe our last. Now let's dig into what's actually written in this updated version of the bill. Because, as always, the devil is in the details, and this language matters. The core of the revision lies in its reworking of the transfer and making taxes under the National Firearms Act. According to the new text, there will still be a $200 tax on the transfer or manufacture of machine guns and what the law classifies as destructive devices. That part remains untouched, and for a lot of people, that alone is a sore point. But here's where things take a turn. For all other NFA-regulated items, yes, that includes suppressors, short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, and those so-called any other weapons. The tax is reduced to zero. Not waived temporarily, not lowered, zero. To put that in plain terms, if you're transferring or building a suppressor or SBR, and this bill passes in its current form, you won't be paying the infamous $200 tax stamp anymore. You'll still be going through the same long, slow, bureaucratic process. You'll still be fingerprinted, registered, and placed into a government database. But for the first time in nearly a century, the financial burden of that process will be lifted. That may sound like a win on the surface, and in some ways, it is. For those who've wanted to legally own a suppressor but couldn't stomach the added cost, this change would remove a major barrier. And let's be clear, a $200 tax might not break the bank for everyone, but it was always more than just a price tag. It was a statement, a punitive measure rooted in fear, not logic, meant to discourage ownership by inconvenience and cost. Erasing that tax for most NFA items is a symbolic strike against that philosophy. But before we get carried away, let's be honest about what hasn't changed. The registration process remains fully intact. That means paperwork. That means waiting periods. That means the federal government still gets your name, your fingerprints, and your firearms serial number. They're not giving up control. They're just giving up the money. And if we're calling things what they are, that's still a problem. The bill doesn't repeal the NFA. It doesn't challenge the legality of the registry. It doesn't return to the original meaning of the Second Amendment. It doesn't restore the fundamental right to own what you want without federal interference. It simply changes the math. And while zero is better than 200, $0 with full registration still isn't freedom. One more point that's raising eyebrows is the wording around the effective date. The language says the amendments will apply to taxable years ending after the date of enactment. That's vague, intentionally or not. If they're using the calendar year as the basis, that would suggest the changes could take effect as soon as January 1st. But if they go by fiscal year, we might be looking at a delay all the way into next July. It's not clear yet. And frankly, that kind of ambiguity tends to work in the government's favor, not ours. So, while this new version of the bill doesn't give us everything we want, and certainly not what we deserve, it does mark a shift, however small, in a system that's resisted reform for generations. Whether it's a step forward or just a clever detour remains to be seen. What's clear is that the fight is far from over, and this might be our only opening, for now. Behind the scenes, the path to this version of the bill has been anything but smooth. The language was altered not by accident, but because of resistance within the Senate itself. Resistance not just from political opponents, but from procedural bottlenecks created by the very people who are supposed to be helping move this legislation forward. One figure at the center of that storm is the Senate parliamentarian, whose interpretation of the rules essentially killed the original attempt to strip out NFA registration entirely. Her decision, deemed procedural in nature, conveniently classified the registration requirement as a matter of policy, not taxation, making it ineligible for inclusion under the budget-focused framework being used. It's a ruling that's both convenient and infuriating. When the same government can take your money, delay your rights, and still call it policy, it becomes clear that words in Washington are tools, not truths. The frustration isn't just with that individual decision, it's with the larger game being played. Political allies have, in some cases, chosen not to fight this decision directly. Some claim they lack the leverage, others argue the timing isn't right, and a few seem content to quietly ride out the controversy in hopes that the base will settle for crumbs instead of a full plate. Pressure is mounting, not only from activists but from within their own party. Midterms loom large on the horizon, and voters are growing tired of symbolic gestures that don't deliver real change. There are whispers that, if this version of the bill passes, some senators may reconsider their approach. They might replace key gatekeepers, revisit the broader policy issues in the fall session, and eventually push for the removal of registration requirements. But these are whispers, not commitments, strategic signals sent quietly to test public reaction without making promises they can be held to. It's not a question of whether the Senate could do more. It's a question of whether they have the political courage to do it now, when it matters. Because once the session closes, once this version is locked in, the next chance may be years away. And by then, the window could be shut for good. Now that the bill has made it through the floor and the ink is barely dry, quiet discussions are already unfolding behind closed doors about what comes next. The version that passed is incomplete, stripped down, tactical, and, in many ways, just a foothold. The registry remains untouched, and that's not an oversight. It's the result of calculated decisions, procedural roadblocks, and political risk management. But it may not be the end of the story. There are increasing signs that this wasn't just about this bill. It was about maneuvering for what's ahead. Some sources within the chamber have hinted that key leadership figures are considering a change in direction during the fall session, including the potential replacement of the Senate parliamentarian. That role, while often overlooked, was central in blocking the original NFA rollback by interpreting registration as policy rather than taxation. Swapping out that position could open the gates to revisiting broader reform. Beyond that, eyes are already turning toward 2026. One scenario being floated is the use of budget reconciliation, something that, under the right conditions, could allow for deeper strikes against the NFA's legal structure. That includes the registry. It's not a promise. It's not even a plan. But it's being talked about. And in politics, that's often how momentum starts, with whispers, not declarations. But this future isn't guaranteed. Every inch gained so far has been the result of outside pressure, not insider goodwill. And every next step will demand more of the same. If the public lets up now, the system will settle into this half measure like it always does. The next move is being calculated right now, and the only thing that ensures it doesn't stall out is continued pressure from the people who never accepted compromise as the final word. The vote has already happened. The language is locked in. For now. But that doesn't mean the pressure stops. In fact, this is when it matters most. What just passed may have reduced the tax burden, but it left the core problem untouched. The government still keeps a registry. The paperwork still exists. The control, the oversight, the slow erosion of what was meant to be a protected right, all of that remains. Now is the time to shift the focus. Not to celebrate, but to escalate. This bill was never the finish line. It was the first concession Washington has made on the NFA in decades. And if they move once, they can move again. If we force it, that means keeping the heat on. Senators who sat on the fence, or who took a quiet victory lap while the registry stood firm, need to know this isn't over. If they think the pressure ends here, they'll never take the next step. Make it known, the tax was only one piece of the problem. The registry must go, the bureaucracy must be dismantled. Call, write, post, vote, And don't let this turn into another moment that dies in silence just because it wasn't a total loss. The Senate blinked. That means they can be made to blink again. This Independence Day, the irony isn't lost. While we celebrate freedom, a generation of gun owners is still navigating a maze of restrictions that shouldn't exist in the first place. A partial win doesn't mean we back off. It means we push harder. So stay engaged, stay informed, stay loud. The tax may have fallen for now, but the fight for full restoration of your rights is still very much alive. And if nothing else, this week proved that pressure works, just not fast, and never without resistance. We either keep fighting or we start accepting less. The choice is ours.